and we don't know how much that leak has been, we don't know the volume of that leak. And there's a second leak.
Tonight, tailings ponds near Fort McKay, Alberta are leaking.
But what this anniversary shows here, the First Nations in Yukon, is that we can get there, and not just here, but everywhere.
A half-century milestone for First Nations in Yukon.
We were able to watch that. It was like fun.
And a camp in Fort Providence brings out the fun. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in Ottawa, where the Trudeau government says they are introducing amendments to the criminal code. The amendments will create an independent commission to review miscarriage of justice applications. According to media reports, there were 62 applications worked on last year. Just one was completed. These applications are currently reviewed by the Department of Justice, but the process has been criticized for being too slow, lacking independence, and underrepresenting Indigenous, Black, and other minorities. James Lockyer is a lawyer with Innocence Canada, an advocacy group for the wrongfully convicted. He says the amendments are a major step in justice reform.
We've been advocating for an independent body to look at wrongful conviction claims. First of all, the fact that it's been the Minister of Justice up to now is bound to put off people applying. If you imagine you've been wrongly convicted, it's like the fox going to the hounds, in a way, is how you might view it.
In Saskatchewan, the trial of Don Walker was adjourned. The mother and author was set to appear in a Saskatoon courthouse this morning, but now the trial will take place on April 5th of this year. She's facing multiple charges related to her disappearance last year. In Labrador, it was a tough morning as the inquiry into Innu youth in provincial care continued. An elder testified about life in the country and showed how a string game was used to explain Innu legends. Angel Moore reports.
It was an emotional morning. Sheheshe Innu elder Jakwesh Panashaway drew a picture of the Innu land, the trees, berries for medicine, mountains, and rivers. Panashaway says she cried when she drew the picture.
Ever since the government has destroyed our land, where are we going to teach our next generation, our children, the youth? There has been so much damage done. Dammed our rivers, destroyed the land.
Mary Jane Edmonds, scheduled to present a timeline of the history of the Mushwa Innu, began with a string game. Edmonds said a favorite among Innu families to share legends and history.
Even though we weren't there, the stories became our history. They were passed on generations after generations.
For years, the Innu Nation called for an inquiry after youth in provincial care lost their language and culture, and 3 youths died by suicide. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabukduk, also known as Halifax.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on the ongoing inquiry. Here's how you can reach out. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find more on the inquiry on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. An Imperial Oil-owned tailings pond northeast of Fort McKay, Alberta, has been leaking since last spring. Earlier this month, a major spill occurred with millions of liters of untreated tailings leaking onto the land. Environmental groups are saying immediate action needs to be taken. Here's APTN's Chris Stewart with more.
On February 4th, 5.3 million liters of untreated tailings from Imperial Oil's Kearl Oil Sands mine leaked into the environment. Tailing ponds contain the leftovers from water mixed with sand, clay, and bitumen in the extraction of oil deep underground in the oil sands. The Imperial Tailings Pond has been leaking since May. The Alberta Energy Regulator issued an environmental protection order on February 6, 2 days after the latest spill. This after issuing Imperial Oil 2 notices of non-compliance in rectifying the original leak. The oil company has until February 28th to have a plan in place to stop and repair damage done. Eleanor Roju is a program manager with Environmental Defence Canada.
And so those leaks, we understand from the documents that the AER released, are a continuous leak of the past 9 months on one part of the facility. And we don't know how much that leak has been, we don't know the volume of that leak. And there's a second leak, kind of a one-time leak, which that's where the numbers get really impressive, of about 5.3 million liters of the tailings content that has been released.
That's enough tailings to fill over 2 Olympic swimming pools. Jessie Cardinal is the executive director of Keepers of the Water. She says she's worried the leak toxic sludge will go into the nearby Athabasca River.
So now it's going to be leaking in, making its way into the Athabasca River, and we need the federal government, we need the provincial government, and Imperial Oil to be answering these questions of what are the impacts? What are going to be the impacts to the water, to the people living in the community of Fort Chipewyan, to the rest of the communities living downstream? And we want to see action.
The Alberta Energy Regulator and Imperial both refused interviews with APTN and issued statements. The statement from the regulator says in part that at this time, no impacts to wildlife have been reported. It goes on to say, the Government of Alberta sets standards and conditions of approval for licensees, and the AER's mandate is to ensure that companies operate within those requirements. Imperial is accountable to now complete and publicly communicate their strategy to attend to this matter. Imperial Oil's statement says in part that we regret these incidents and are making every effort to learn from them and apply preventative measures. Based on our monitoring to date, there are no reported impacts to wildlife or fish in the area, and no measurable impact to local waterways. Cardinal says that the total volume of Alberta's tailing ponds is about 1.4 trillion liters.
So right now we have these 19 toxic ponds. They call them ponds. They're about the size of a lake. Like, they're massive. You have to see them to believe them. They're completely toxic. And so now we're at the point where they're starting to massively breach, where you have 5.4 million liters leaking into the environment.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Love filled downtown Winnipeg on Valentine's Day as over 200 people marched during a blizzard to remember their loved ones. APTN's Leanne Sanders has that story.
They gathered in memory of Winnipeg's missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people whose lives were taken in a violent epidemic sweeping Turtle Island.
Especially for those who have lost ones in the past or are still missing, it's us to show that we as women are resilient, and though we are hurt, we are still here, and we're going to be aware, and we're going to be proud and loud.
Organizer Anna Heward says the large turnout for an event during a snowstorm is indicative of how important these memorial marches are.
It shows that we're strong and resilient, and that despite some unlikely conditions happening, that we're still going to show up for each other, no matter what.
Candace Voke lost her daughter to murder just over 2 years ago, and her son soon after. Despite the blizzard and below -20 wind chill, she says nothing could stop her from marching for them.
How cold I get, I think of some of the girls whose bodies were found in winter, and how cold they must have been. So to be cold for a few minutes in their memory and honor is nothing.
Though there were many tears, laughter could be heard throughout the crowd as marchers found community in one another.
I feel safe here because they know what we're going through, a lot of families. We all belong to this club that I don't ever want anyone to belong to.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
There could be a shake-up in federal representation for a First Nation in Manitoba. That story and much more coming up after the break. Welcome back. First Nations in the Yukon are celebrating this week. Wednesday marked the 50th anniversary of a defining document that paved the way for negotiating land claims in the territory. As Sarah Connors tells us, the celebration kicked off with a visit from Prime Minister Trudeau.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and son Hadrian were front and center at a hand games tournament this past weekend in Whitehorse. Their visit, part of a milestone celebration for First Nations in the Yukon.
Come a long way. We have. There's still more work to do. But,
and one that wouldn't be complete without meeting the people at the very heart of a legacy that's now spanned 5 decades. The hand games were one of many activities being held this week in celebration of the 50th anniversary of the document, Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. The groundbreaking document highlighted frustrations experienced by First Nations people during the 1960s and 70s, while also exploring the future First Nations leaders wanted for their people. That future included negotiating a settlement so First Nations in the Yukon could prosper.
But what this anniversary shows here for First Nations in Yukon is that we can get there, and not just here, but everywhere.
On February 14, 1973, a delegation of Yukon chiefs, led by Elijah Smith, presented the document to Trudeau's father, then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. The chiefs were able to convince the federal government to begin a negotiation process that would lead to modern-day treaties.
It was wonderful and important for me to be able to come here to the Yukon tonight, and somewhat fitting, because 50 years ago, you came to visit my father in Ottawa.
Together Today laid the groundwork for modern land claims negotiations in the Yukon and Canada. Today, 11 of 14 First Nations in the territory have settled land claims and are self-governing. Council of Yukon First Nations Chief Peter Johnston says Together Today's vision for a better tomorrow is being felt today.
50 years later, we are now taking our rightful place back in our communities, back in the territory, and back in this country.
We must continue our work so that the next generation and the generation after that and the one after that can continue to heal and understand that everyone is worthy of honor, respect, and shared stewardship of the present and future of this country.
The week-long celebration includes activities like an archival collection, a First Nations trade show, and an artist market. The celebration wraps up Saturday with a family fun day. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Should it stay or should it go? That's the question put forward by the Manitoba Federal Boundaries Commission. For the next federal election, it's recommending switching one First Nation from its current northern riding and placing it in one further to the south. A councillor with the First Nation is in favor of the change, but the 2 local members of Parliament are against. APTN's Fraser Needham explains.
The Little Saskatchewan First Nation currently has the NDP's Nikki Ashton as its MP in the riding of Churchill-Keewatin-Naski. But if a proposed change takes place, it would be in the Selkirk-Interlake-Eastman riding, now represented by Conservative MP James Bazan. For his part, Little Saskatchewan First Nation councillor Albert Shorting says this makes sense.
Well, that's where we do all our business. We do our grocery shopping there. We buy vehicles and all that kind of stuff from our area.
Shorting says his community is much more connected to the Selkirk region than the sprawling northern riding, one of the largest in Canada. Ashton says she respects Shorting's viewpoint, but Little Saskatchewan should remain where it is.
The councillor is free to express that position. I have spoken to, as I said, we relayed this to the leadership. I've spoken to community members that that are with whom obviously we've built relationships around access to parliamentary services and work in the community, et cetera, who would like to remain in Churchill, Keewatin, Nipisiki. So I think that, there are a very range of perspectives to raise.
Bazan agrees with Ashton that Little Saskatchewan First Nation should remain in the Churchill constituency.
So it's just a matter of also being able to have that consistent representation. But that's not to say that, if it ends up at the end of the day that they are in my riding, and I'll be happy to work with them as I do with other First Nations that are in my riding.
But Shorting says having representation in Selkirk-Interlake would be a better fit for both the First Nation and MP.
I believe if we have an MP in Selkirk, it's a lot closer for the MP to come and join us if he wishes to, because he'll be a lot closer.
The House of Commons Procedures Committee will be studying the Manitoba boundary recommendations on Thursday. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Time for one more quick break, but do stick around. We're off to the Decho region of the Northwest Territories to check in on a cultural camp. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And Marie sent in this picture of her and her Valentine, Darren. Thanks, Marie, and we hope you and Darren were able to enjoy your Valentine's Day. We have one more day this week, and we want to see you and your sweetheart, so send those pictures to share at aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, +5 in Halifax, -5 in Charlottetown, -29 in Kuujjuaq, 18 below with snow in Nain, -3 in Montreal with snow, 18 below in Chibougamau. -5 and cloudy for Sault Ste. Marie, 9 below in North Bay. -5 with snow in Thunder Bay, 15 below in Sioux Lookout. -29 and snow in Churchill, flurries and 7 below for God's Lake. 0 with snow in Winnipeg, -1 and flurries in Dauphin. -2 with snow in Regina, 3 below and snow for Saskatoon. -6 with snow in Meadow Lake, 24 below in Stony Rapids. Over to northern Alberta where the snow continues, 20 below in Fort Chip, 0 for Grand Prairie. +1 with snow in Edmonton, 4 above in Lethbridge. +7 for Vancouver, 8 above in Victoria. +2 with flurries in Prince George, 1 above in Smithers. -29 in Old Crow, 4 below with snow in Whitehorse. -33 for Yellowknife, 28 below in Norman Wells. -31 in Sax Harbor, 36 below in Colville Lake. -40 for Chesterfield, 39 below in Whale Cove. -35 in Resolute, 36 below in Igloo Lake. It's that time of year for culture camps in the north, and while it's a familiar setting for locals, it's a new backdrop for youth traveling in as guests to the Decho region of the Northwest Territories. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs brings you this story.
Mark Kudunak is excited to try dene drumming for the first time, and he's received a warm welcome to do so, learning at the week-long youth conference at Telemia Camp near Fort Providence, Northwest Territories.
Like just walking on the river and like the trees coming up from both sides was so nice because we got no trees where I'm from.
Kudunak is 16 from Johaven, Nunavut. He's one of nearly 50 youth participating at the conference hosted by local NGOs and Indigenous governments.
You're going to pack here.
It aims to bring together youth from northern communities to share common histories, traditional teachings, and discuss current experiences.
I wanted to go out here because it sounds like such a great experience, and I really like meeting new people, getting to know different cultures.
Isabella Arafeliu is 14 from Ottawa.
I wanted to learn about the community a bit more, and I heard we were going to be bison hunting, snowmobiling. I was going to be trying things I haven't tried before, so I really wanted to be part of that.
The conference also looks to build relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous participants as they discuss topics such as reconciliation, allyship, and conflict resolution.
We had the elders pray and talk about their life experiences, and some people didn't want to smudge, but we were still able to watch the giving ceremony, I think that's what they call it, where they give like offerings to the dead. Yeah, we were able to watch that. It was like fun.
Located on the traditional territory of the Decho-Dene and Métis, youth are active participants in camp, completing chores like setting nets and getting wood.
Seeing what the youth what they best like to do, and being on the land where they can be very free, I guess.
Olivia Dobbs, who works with the Yukon First Nation Education Directorate, is here as a chaperone, and she's hoping to bring back ideas to her region.
I do feel like there's more traditional camps and stuff being presented, since also the First Nation School Board took over some of the schools, and so they're really trying to implement some of those traditional practices.
For Kununak, camp is comforting. He's ready to contribute to conversations around decolonization and, in the meantime, also finish a beaver hat.
A lot of First Nations went through colonization and just want to learn how, like, they learn to deal with their trauma and learn to forgive.
Charlotte Morat-Jacobs, APTN National News, Telemia Camp near Fort Providence.
Charlotte always gets to go to the cool places. Well, it's Thursday, and that means Nation to Nation's coming up right after the news here. Here's host Annette Francis.
Tonight we'll hear from human rights advocate and Senator Kim Pate. She calls the Conservative Party's bail reform bill a knee-jerk reaction. And she talks about her own proposed legislation to keep Indigenous people out of prisons and jails. A parliamentary committee is studying low graduation rates of Indigenous students. And the president of the Métis National Council appeared before it and went on Nation to Nation to say there's more work to do. I'll give you the lowdown of some of the other happenings on Parliament Hill this week. That's coming up on Nation to Nation.
Good stuff. Thanks, Annette. Nation to Nation is just moments away, so stick around. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.